Mrs. Ellen G. White as a missionary to Australia, using phones for mission in Japan and helping refugees in Atlanta. Coming up next on Mission 360. Hello and welcome to Mission 360. I'm Gary Krause. Today's program is coming from Avondale College of Higher Education, a Seventh-day Adventist tertiary institution here in Australia. It's located in the town of Cooranbong, which is about an hour and a half north of Sydney. It was founded in 1897 largely through the influence of Ellen White, who actually lived not so far from here in a place called Sunnyside, and we'll be visiting there on today's program. And we'll be talking some about the influence of Avondale College. Through the years, it has trained many people for many areas of service. In fact, its motto is a greater vision of world needs. And today, the South Pacific Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church has its own mission field, the islands of the South Pacific. And it's largely through missionaries trained at this institution that the church has been established and grown all through the Pacific. In fact, today there are far more Seventh-day Adventist members, for example, in Papua New Guinea than there are right here in Australia. On today's program, we'll be looking at the influence of Ellen White in establishing this college. But first up, let's travel to Japan and see a unique way of sharing the good news about Jesus.
I'm here in Tokyo, one of the world's largest cities, and I'm surrounded by new friends and potential friends. But even though I'm surrounded by people, it's really hard to connect heart to heart. They're isolated, lonely, even though we're surrounded by people. So let's go check out an urban center of influence that's making a difference to the lonely hearts. I'm here with my friend, Pastor Kobayashi, and he's the Sabbath School and Personal Ministries Director for the Japan Union Conference. Pastor Kobayashi, it's so good to be here with you. Can you tell us about how long has the Christian Telephone Friend ministry been going?
This ministry was started in 1997, so it's been around for about 20 years.
As I continued talking with my friend, Pastor Kobayashi, he shared with me that in Tokyo there are a lot of lonely people who need help. They shut themselves in their homes and disconnect from society. It's a defense mechanism to cope with the overwhelming amount of people. Despite being in such a large city, they find a way to isolate themselves. The Adventist Church in Japan started a ministry called Christian Telephone Friends to reach those isolated people and to serve their needs. A team of volunteers goes through extensive training to be effective listeners by trained counselors. Church members distribute cards and post ads throughout the city, and then people have been contacting them. This creative urban center of influence in Tokyo has allowed the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Japan to minister to countless lives. Yet Tokyo isn't the only city where people feel alone. And in the cities around the world, many have managed to isolate themselves, not just from others, but also from God. This type of outreach can be replicated in other places under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. For anyone who wants to disciple and minister to those who don't know God yet, how can you use this model in your city?
Thank you for joining me in Tokyo, the world's largest city. I hope that you were inspired by the story of this urban center of influence, Christian Telephone Friends, on how they're able to meet needs in the community and then be able to step by step make disciples, just like Jesus did. Join me in praying for this city, as well as all the other cities around the world, as we uplift Jesus as we continue our mission to the cities.
My guest is Dr. Alan Lindsay, and many viewers will recognize him as the presenter of the Keepers of the Flame series, and more recently he was also the historical consultant for the Tell the World movie. But more important, Dr. Lindsay, you were my teacher many years ago in Adventist history, and I have many fond memories of those days. And here we are in front of the home where Ellen White lived for 4 years while living here in Australia, and Dr. Lindsay is going to show us around this house. Thanks, Dr. Lindsay. So, Dr. Lindsay, we're in the first room just as you walk in. Tell us about it.
We're fairly sure, Gary, that this was Ellen White's bedroom.
Okay.
You'll see the bed here, the pieces of furniture in here belong to Ellen White. There are photographs on the wall, James White, her husband, and Ellen White. An interesting chart here that belonged to the William Miller movement that was actually discovered inside this little desk, and it was in a hidden compartment in this desk, which is interesting. As we stand in this room, Gary, I always think that because Ellen White had many visions, and her visions while she was here in Australia were always night visions, not given during the day. So it would be in this room that angels came and visited her while she was living here in her home.
Wonderful. Let's keep moving on. This way?
Yes, this way. There's some interesting photographs and pictures here in this room. Yes, the painting up here by an Australian Adventist painter, Eric Weir, is taken off a photograph. In fact, it was the only photograph that we had taken while Ellen White was in Australia, way back in 1899. There are other pictures of interest as we look around this room. The photograph over here is of Ellen White's son, who lived with her here in Australia, Willie White, W.C. White as he's sometimes known, with his second wife, who happened to be an Australian girl. And the two girls behind are two daughters from his first wife, who unfortunately died in 1890. There were twins born while Ellen White was here, and you can see the two boys as they grew up. Ellen White was very proud of these two boys that were born. And here is a well-known photograph, Ellen White on the left, James White, and the two surviving sons. She had 4 boys altogether, lost 2 of them in 1 at 3 months, one at 16 years of age, but the 2 surviving ones became ministers of the church, Willie White and James Edson White.
Great. Lead us on, yeah. So, Dr. Lindsay, when Ellen White was here, what sort of writings did she tend to focus on? What did she produce while in this house?
Well, the very significant production that was made here, Gary, was Desire of Ages. I mean, Desire of Ages is one of the 5 Conflict of the Ages books, and Desire of Ages is possibly the most wonderful of the 5. It's on the life of Jesus. She finished it here in 1898. That was just 2 years before she left to go back to the United States.
Okay.
That book originally was much bigger than it is today. Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing on the Sermon on the Mount, and also Christ's Object Lessons on the parables. That was taken out of the original Desire of Ages because it proved too big a book.
Yes.
So she did that, and then she began to write a great deal. In fact, between 1897 and 1899, she wrote more on Christian education than at any other time in her life. And that was because she was leading out in establishing the Avondale College, which is nearby.
Fascinating. And this room we're in here?
We're not quite sure what this room was originally. It may have been connected to the kitchen, but we think the kitchen was more outside and connected to the home. But we have some interesting objects in this room as well, particularly over here. Is the only photograph we have of Ellen White in Sunnyside, and that's just as Sunnyside looks today. You can see Ellen White there in the doorway, the main doorway, with some of her workers. So this was an interesting room, but only more because it was connected more to the dining room, which is next door. There are some pieces of furniture here that belong to Ellen White, and certainly in this room there are a number of pieces of furniture that belong to Ellen White. This dining room table, that was hers. And you can see seating 6 people, but many of the significant leaders of the church, General Conference President, Pastor Daniels, who was the President of the Australian Union, they would come here, and many were entertained by Ellen White at her table. One of the very interesting features of this room is a book that is really an autograph album. It was This book was given to Ellen White just a few days before she left Australia on the boat to go back to the United States. It has many interesting stories in it, mainly because these people were writing to Ellen White a little message that she was to read on her way back to the United States. A particularly interesting part of this book is a page that was written by Nathaniel Davis. Nathaniel Davis, Gary, was a worker here in Australia in the late 1890s, and he came and visited this home, met Ellen White in the front room, and there she told him that he was involved in spiritualism. He was actually controlled by an evil spirit. And there were many anxious moments. The next night after her visit, she was given a vision about Nathaniel Davis, the problems that he had, not only with spiritualism, evidently he had problems with money and handling of money, even involved to a certain extent in immorality. And so she wrote a letter to Nathaniel Davis and was very concerned about him. To cut a long story short, she eventually was so concerned that she asked Pastor Daniels, the General Conference President, to be in the next few years, and asked him to take a message, a letter from her to Nathaniel Davis. But she didn't trust Nathaniel Davis to read anything from her. And so she asked Pastor Daniels to read the letter. He read the letter. We have a dramatic description of that letter afterwards, as he told it. When Nathaniel Davis threw a knife at Pastor Davis, when he was being Daniels, when he was being controlled by this evil spirit. He eventually, after a season of prayer, was released from this spirit. When in the autograph album, and he heard about the album, he wrote one of these autographs, and I'm going to read it to you. It affords me the most sincere pleasure to have the privilege of putting on record my appreciation of Sister White's work and my gratitude to my Heavenly Father for the messages sent through her to his people. The faithful witness thus born revealed to me the means whereby the bondage of Satan was broken, when owing to the influence of spiritualism, I had well nigh become a spiritual wreck. I have every reason to be positive in my confidence in Sister White as a true prophet. And it was signed by Nathaniel Davis in Geelong, Victoria, in August 1900.
Fantastic.
But this book represents a lot of very interesting stories of people who were blessed by Ellen White when she lived here in this home.
Yeah, Dr. Lindsay, thank you so much for some of the insights so many stories happened in this building. Thank you so much. And later in our program, we'll be learning more about Ellen White's role here in Cooranbong, and particularly in the founding of Avondale College just nearby. Welcome back. My guest is Dr. John Shipashek, who is the director of the Ellen G. White Seventh-day Adventist Research Centre here at Avondale College. Dr. Shipashek, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
I wanted to have you tell us a little bit about the history of this place, but we need to start first with the arrival of Ellen White to Australia. Now, we've talked before, and you've referred to Australia as a mission field at that time.
Yeah, because Ellen White arrived here in December of 1891 in response to the invitation that was extended to her by the missionaries who already arrived in 1885. And it's quite sort of an interesting time because as they progressively developed the Seventh-day Adventist Church here, they saw a need for education to educate young people for work in the mission, on the mission islands.
So at that time, if you were at the General Conference in America, you would have seen Australia as the mission field.
Yes, it was definitely, and it links, actually, it goes a little bit further, because it links with Ellen White's vision, which she was given in 1874, where she talks about that sort of tremendously specific vision in which she saw the message being extended to all parts of the world in a power. And she refers to Oregon, Europe, and Australia. So already at that time, Australia was perceived as the future mission field.
Right. Now, when she came to Australia, she didn't come straight to here. Where did she live first?
Well, initially she stayed here for a day and straight away she moved on to Melbourne. Now that was the beginning of our sort of work in Melbourne, where the pioneers already set up the canvassing work and the publishing work, and gradually, actually by 1888, before she arrived, the Australian Conference was organized with 5 churches and 266 members. Okay. By the time she arrived, the number of Adventists already in this area, I think it was about 700, right, both in Australia and New Zealand.
Okay. So how did this specific institution, what we know as Avondale College of Higher Education, how was it begun?
Well, it began with a vision and God's guidance. I've got no doubt about it. What happened in 1894, the church leaders began to search for a place to set up a school. It was a difficult time because it was a time of depression in Australia. And Willie White describes it in a very graphic way. He says, okay, we are about to move into this adventure of searching for and purchase a new land, but we don't even have enough money to see it. Okay. However, they had 2 options. There was one piece of land, 3,000 acres, west of, south of Sydney, near the Illawarra Lake, and the Bradfield Estate. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that when they arrived here, it again connects with Ellen White's vision, which she describes many years after. In 1898, she talks about this sort of vision where she saw 2 people standing at the Faro criticizing the land. Oh. Suggesting that it was infertile, that it was unproductive. And then she said, the angel, which often stood by my side, said to me, do not listen to that because the land is productive. Oh. Now, at that point of time, she makes an interesting remark. Let me read to you the quotation, because then she goes back to that experience. That's in 1898, okay? So she talks about the fact that they arrived here, and when they arrived with that party, okay, she again saw the same people that she saw in the dream standing next to the Pharaoh and criticizing negatively the place. Oh. And she said to the guys, no, this place has been sort of indicated to us by God that it is a fertile, that it is productive, so let's go ahead and let's purchase it. So she, in 1898, and even before, she does not refer to the place, okay, and to the spot. I think the emphasis is on God's providence and God's guidance.
Did you say you had a quote for us?
Yeah, I did have a quote for you, and it sort of disappeared, but it'll come up on the screen in just a moment. The next day, we were on the cars, on our way to meet others who were investigating the land. As I was afterward walking on the ground where the trees had been removed, lo, there was a Pharaoh, just as I had described it, and the men also who had criticized the appearance of the land. The words were spoken just as I had dreamed.
Okay.
Okay. Oh. However, it's quite interesting that she does not refer to a specific spot and place.
Okay.
Okay. Rather to the experience of God's leading and guidance.
Okay. So here we are in many, many years later. What has this Institute of Higher Learning contributed to the mission of the church?
I think quite a lot, but I think we need to see it from a bigger perspective, from a bigger picture. Let me explain. The most productive years in Ellen White's ministry to the church were between 1888 and 1911. During that time, she developed a vision for the church, and during that time also she published all of the important books that we have on hand now. A time of 23 years. 9 years out of that period she spent here in Australia. And I suggest that during that time she develops the principles of what it means to live in the time of eschatological waiting for the coming of Jesus. Interestingly, the college was opened in 1897. In 1897, she begins to review the work on the book Education. And in the book Education, she casts the vision, which is quite powerful. Willie White describes that before the book was published, they sent a letter to Professor Sutherland, and in that letter, they suggest that in no other book has she embraced the theme of the great controversy like in this book. And she develops in the book Education 4 principles: spiritual authenticity, genuine relationship, professional development, and the importance of identity, personal identity. Now, I would like to suggest to you that when you look at the book Education, she talks about a greater vision. Education is not only preparation for service in this life, but in the life to come. She talks about education specifically targeting the betterment of the society, so that young people can develop their identity, their uniqueness, and then move on to the world and share the message of Jesus. And I think this is the contribution that she made here from Avondale College, where they've trained the missionaries for the Pacific Islands.
Yeah, exactly. John, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Okay.
Next up, we travel to Atlanta, Georgia, to see how the church is ministering to refugees.
To relieve a lot of the pressures that the refugee families face when they enter America, we gather furniture so they don't have to sleep on the floor, mattresses. We get rice and beans, some just basic necessities that they have so they feel comfortable when they come here. Then we try to go and spend time with them and get to know them. And then after they stay approximately a year in an international school and learn a little bit of English, then we will look at taking them and trying to sponsor them for education in a private school. So that way they have a really good foundation. I went to Clarkston and we took laptops and we started looking for scholarships for some of them, and we were blessed with 6 years ago, 12 scholarships that you could use to go to any private school in Georgia. Something to get you through the day type of thing, right? We make 27 lunches a day. 27 of the kids can't afford to bring their own lunch. 90% of the kids that come don't do breakfast. So for some of them, this is all they're going to have in their belly until tonight, 6 or 7 o'clock, when they'll get a bowl of rice for dinner. So that's why we like to give them lunches, to make sure that they can have something in their belly to be able to take tests and be able to focus in the classroom, so they can give us their best performance.
Good morning, children. When I pass out lunches to the kids in the morning, so many of them will come up and hug me. At times they get so rambunctious they nearly knock me off my feet. But the hugs and the pure joy that they show is just indescribable.
God answered my prayers. I get to attend an Adventist school and I get to receive a 4.0, not because of my ability, but because of God's help.
When she came to Adventist school, she could just focus on her grades and focus on being the child that she wanted to be and not get teased or, you know, actually she's praised for all of her accomplishments that she has achieved. And we started off 6 years ago with 12, and then we went to like 20, and then I think it was like 25. And we currently have 61 kids that we help. And then we also have some kids that they're different religions. We bring them to Adventist schools. So we have the energy and the desire to help everyone. but this is God. This is God's hand in this. I'm just a little part of His great plan.
I just want to say, don't be afraid to go out and befriend or get to know a refugee, because I'm pretty sure they will be happy to have you in their life, and you never know, they might change your life too.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on Mission 360. I hope that you've been challenged by what you've seen, and I hope that you've also been inspired by what you've seen and heard. And I want to thank you so much for being part of Adventist Mission. You may say, well, I've never gone as a missionary, I haven't done anything fancy. Well, just the mere fact that you are praying for mission makes a difference, and that there is a worldwide team of people who are praying, who are, where they can, supporting financially mission work around the world. It does make a difference, and I want to thank you so much. I hope that you've been inspired by the ministry of Ellen White here in Kurrambong. From Avondale College, over the years, hundreds and hundreds of missionaries have been sent. They've caught a vision for world needs, and many, many lives have been changed, and people have been prepared for Jesus' coming. We'd like to send you a small free gift to thank you for your support and your participation in Adventist Mission. It's a book entitled God's Great Missionaries, and this book is packed full of stories of mission and also principles of mission that can guide us today. Well, for Adventist Mission, I'm Gary Krause, and I hope that you can join me next time right here on Mission 360.